Yo, Drake is done for. I'm not even playing right now. One of his most loyal soldiers just turned on him publicly, and the internet is absolutely losing it. We're talking about Top 5, the same dude who defended Drake through everything, who went to war for OVO online, who stood by Drake when the entire world was clowning him during the Kendrick beef. That guy just called Drake a weirdo and posted Kendrick Lamar on his page like it's nothing. And listen, this isn't some random hater talking. This is family. This is inner circle. This is the type of betrayal that doesn't just sting, it destroys the entire foundation of what Drake's been building in Toronto for years. The loyalty, gone. The brotherhood, shattered. And what's wild is this whole situation is still unfolding as we speak, and people are saying Top 5 is holding back major information that could make this even worse. We're about to dive deep into how one of Drake's biggest defenders became his harshest critic, why he leaked a Drake and Pressa track out of spite, and what this means for OVO's entire reputation moving forward. Because trust me, by the time we're done here, you're gonna see this whole Drake empire in a completely different light. All right, so everybody thought they knew the full story about Drake and his Toronto crew, right? The narrative has always been that Drake is this loyal king who looks out for his people, who puts Toronto on his back, who never forgets where he came from. That's the image. That's what we've been sold for over a decade now. Drake the loyal, Drake the mentor, the guy who brings everybody up with him. But now, with Top 5 going completely rogue and airing out OVO's dirty laundry on a public call with DJ Akademiks, yeah, that happened. The whole narrative is twisting into something way darker. Because what we're seeing isn't just one person having beef. This is a pattern emerging. This is people close to Drake starting to question whether that loyalty was ever real, or if it was just transactional the whole time. And here's what makes this different from every other Drake controversy. Top 5 wasn't some random collaborator. He wasn't a feature artist who worked with Drake once and felt slighted. This dude was in the trenches for Drake. He was out here defending Drake against Kendrick stans when everyone was clouding Family Matters. He was going at anyone who dared disrespect OVO. He was Drake's enforcer in the online streets, basically. So when someone like that flips, when someone who had every reason to stay loyal suddenly burns the bridge publicly and says, yeah, Drake's a weirdo and I'm rocking with Kendrick now, that's not just drama, that's a full-blown crisis. And the implications of this go way beyond just one beef. Because now people are asking, if Top 5 saw something that made him turn, what exactly did he see? Okay, let's get into the evidence, because this is where things go from messy to absolutely insane. First off, Top 5 hopped on a live call with DJ Akademiks, and if you know anything about Akademiks, you know he's basically Drake's unofficial PR guy at this point. So for Top 5 to willingly go on that platform and air Drake out, that's intentional. That's calculated. That's someone who wanted Drake to hear this. Now, in this call, Top 5 straight up says, and I'm not paraphrasing here, he calls Drake a weirdo. Not in a joking way, not in a we're still cool but I'm upset way. He says it with venom. He says it like someone who feels betrayed, disrespected, and completely done with the fake loyalty act. Now, think about that for a second. That means Top 5 had access. He had insider information. He had the song files. He was close enough to know Drake's release strategy and close enough to sabotage it when he felt that it was wrong. That's not just someone on the outside looking in. That's someone who was trusted, who had proximity, who was embedded in the operation. And here's where fans online turned into full-blown investigators, because once Top 5 made that admission, people started going back through timelines. They started looking at when National Treasure leaked, who was posting about it, what the circumstances were. And folks online are now saying this wasn't just a random leak, it was revenge. It was Top 5 sending a message to Drake that loyalty is a two-way street. And if you don't respect the people around you, they're gonna make you pay for it. But wait, there's more. Because after this call, Top 5 doesn't just stop at calling Drake a weirdo. He goes on Instagram and posts a picture related to Kendrick Lamar's Not Like Us. You know that song that bodied Drake in public eye? The song that had the entire internet doing that, trying to strike a chord, and it's probably a minor match. That song. Top 5 posts Kendrick content like he's openly declaring which side he's on now. And it gets even crazier. Top 5 starts interacting with Hit J3, a West Coast rapper who's affiliated with Kendrick and was part of the GNX album rollout. They're exchanging friendly messages, they're showing love publicly. Top 5 is literally aligning himself with Kendrick's circle while simultaneously trashing Drake. Let that sink in. A dude who used to go to war for Drake online is now posting Kendrick, shouting out Kendrick's affiliates, and calling Drake out by name. That's not just switching sides, it's a full-blown defection. That's someone who's done playing in the game and wants everyone to know where he stands now. Now, fans online started doing what they do best, digging through everything. They're going through old tweets, old Instagram comments, looking for clues about when this fallout started. And what they found is fascinating. Apparently, there were subtle signs months ago that Top 5 was getting frustrated with how OVO operates. Little subtweets, vague posts about loyalty, comments that seemed innocent at the time, but now look like warning signs. And here's the kicker. Multiple people in the Toronto scene are now saying this wasn't a surprise to them. They're saying Top 5 had been venting privately for a while. But nobody expected him to go this public with it. That tells you something major happened recently, something that pushed him over the edge and made him say, you know what, I'm done protecting this image. All right, now let's get into the motive, because this is where everything starts clicking into place and you realize this wasn't just some random outburst. This was years in the making. To understand why Top 5 snapped, you gotta understand the history between him, Drake, Pressa, and the whole Toronto street politics that most people outside the city don't fully grasp. So first, let's talk about Pressa. Pressa's a rapper who's had an on-and-off relationship with Drake for years. Drake's co-signed him, brought him into OVO spaces, done tracks with him. But here's the thing. Pressa and Top 5, they're ops. Like legitimate street level opposition. They rep different sides, different blocks, different energies. And in Toronto street culture, that matters. You can't just brush that off. Now, Top 5 says he helped Drake out with some serious legal trouble in the past. He claims Drake was facing some heat, and Top 5 uses connections, his influence, whatever he had, to get Drake out of a jam. According to Top 5, that created a bond. That created an understanding. That made him think, okay, we're really locked in now. Drake's got my back, I've got his. But then, Pressa drops an album. And on this album, there are tracks where Pressa is allegedly dissing Top 5's head, talking reckless about areas Top 5 is connected to. Now, in Toronto street culture, that's a big deal. That's disrespect. That's a line that's being crossed. And what does Drake do? Instead of staying neutral, instead of staying out of it like he claimed he would in the past, Drake actively promotes Pressa's album. He reposts it. He gives it his cosign. He puts his weight behind it. And Top 5 sees listen thinks, hold on. You're actively supporting someone who's dissing my area, someone who is my up, after everything I did for you. That's the moment right there. That's when loyalty died in Top 5's eyes, because Drake didn't just stay silent. He actively chose a side, and it was not Top 5's side. Now let's add some context here. Drake has always played this game where he tries to be above the politics. He'll say things like, I don't pick sides, I just want to see everybody win. But time and time again, people in Toronto have pointed out that Drake absolutely does pick sides. He just picks whoever benefits him at the moment. And this situation with Pressa, it perfectly illustrates that pattern. Think about it from Top 5's perspective. He defended Drake online when the entire internet was calling him a colonizer, a culture vulture, a deadbeat dowd, all that. He went to bat for Drake during the Kendrick beef when Drake was getting destroyed in the court of public opinion. He was out there risking his own reputation to prop up Drake's image. And what did he get in return? Drake promoting his ops album.
That kind of betrayal hits different when it's someone you thought had your back. It's not even about the music at that point. It's about respect. It's about principle. It's about whether the loyalty you showed is going to be reciprocated when it matters. And in Top 5's case, the answer was a resounding no. But here's where it gets even messier. According to Top 5, when he confronted Drake about the Pressa situation, Drake tried to play it off, tried to act like it wasn't a big deal, tried to minimize Top 5's feelings about it. And that dismissiveness was the final straw, because it wasn't just that Drake made a choice. It's that Drake didn't even respect Top 5 enough to acknowledge why that choice hurt. Now, Let's talk about Pressa's side for a second, because this story has layers. Pressa and Drake's relationship has been rocky for a minute. There have been periods where Drake was heavy in Pressa's corner and other times where it seemed like Drake ghosted him completely. Some people in Toronto say Drake only checks in with Pressa when it's convenient, when it makes Drake look connected to the streets, but the moment things get too hot, Drake distances himself. And that transactional energy, that's what Top 5 is calling out. He's not just mad about the Pressa situation in isolation. He's mad because it represents a pattern of Drake using people, extracting what he needs from them, and then moving on without looking back. Top 5 watched it happen to others, probably brushed it off, thinking, nah, I'm different, Drake and I really locked in. But then it happened to him, and suddenly everything made sense. And here's where it gets even more significant. Top 5 isn't just some street dude with no platform. He had a voice in the Toronto hip-hop community. He had influence. He was someone people listened to. So when he says Drake's loyalty is fake, that carries weight. That makes other people who've had similar experiences feel validated. That opens the floodgates for more stories to come out. Which brings us to DJ Akademiks' role in all of this, because his response during that call was telling. Akademiks spent the entire conversation trying to defend Drake, trying to minimize Top 5's grievances, trying to spin it like Top 5 was overreacting, and Top 5 wasn't having it. He kept pushing back, kept bringing receipts, kept refusing to let Akademiks gaslight him into thinking his feelings weren't valid. And honestly, that dynamic, Akademiks playing defense for Drake while someone with legitimate complaints tries to be heard, that's a microcosm of how Drake's entire media ecosystem works. Drake has people in place whose whole job is to control the narrative, to make sure criticism doesn't stick, to paint anyone who speaks out as bitter or jealous or irrational. But when someone like Top 5, who was part of that ecosystem, steps out and says, nah, y'all are covering for him, it disrupts a whole machine. Now, here's the part that really hits different. And it's something that goes beyond just music beef or street politics. During that call with Akademiks, Top 5 made some heavy allegations, not about Drake directly in this case, but about people in Drake's immediate circle. Specifically, he made claims about Chubbs, who's one of Drake's closest friends and basically acts as OVO security and enforcer. Now, Top 5 didn't go into graphic detail here, and I'm not going to speculate on specifics because we're talking about serious accusations that haven't been proven. But the fact that this was said on a record by someone who was inside the camp is huge. Because even if you don't have proof, even if it's just an allegation, once that kind of claim is out there from an insider, it changes how people view the entire organization. It makes people ask, if someone that close is willing to say that publicly, what else is going on behind closed doors? It plants seeds of doubt that are really hard to uproot. And this is where the emotional weight of this situation really lands, because we're not just talking about rap beef anymore. We're not just talking about album sales or diss tracks or who won per battle. We're talking about the culture around Drake, the people he surrounds himself with, and whether that environment is healthy or toxic. Think about all the young artists who've looked up to Drake, who wanted to be part of OVO, who saw it as this aspirational goal. Now they're watching one of Drake's most loyal defenders publicly walk away and make serious allegations about the people in that camp. That's going to make them think twice. That's going to make them wonder if the image matches the reality. And for fans, like regular people who've supported Drake's music for years, this hits different too, because part of what made Drake appealing was this idea that he was loyal, that he was a good dude, that he looked out for people. But when story after story keeps coming out about people feeling used, betrayed, or uncomfortable around OVO's inner circle, it becomes harder to separate the artist from the environment he's created. Now, Top 5 also got emotional during parts of that call. You could hear it in his voice. This wasn't just anger. This was hurt. This was someone who genuinely believed in the relationship, who thought there was real brotherhood there, and who's now processing the fact that it was all conditional, that it only existed as long as he stayed in mind and didn't ask questions. And that's the part that makes the story more than just celebrity gossip. Because how many of us have been in situations where we thought we had somebody's loyalty only to realize it was transactional? How many times have we given our all to someone who only gave back when it was convenient for them? That's what makes this resonate beyond just hip-hop drama. It's a universal experience of betrayal. Now, let's bring it back to the facts for a second. After this call aired, people in the Toronto scene started speaking up carefully, but they started speaking. Anonymous accounts, cryptic tweets, subposts, all hinting at the same thing, that Top 5's experience isn't unique, that there are other people who felt similarly burned by how OVO operates, but haven't gone public yet because they're scared of the backlash, scared of being blackballed, scared of Drake's power in the industry. But when someone like Top 5, who was part of that ecosystem, steps out and says, nah, y'all are covering for him, it disrupts the whole machine. Now, we gotta be clear, allegations are not the same as proof. Everything I'm talking about here is based on what Top 5 said, what people online are claiming, what the narrative looks like from the outside. None of us were in the room, none of us have access to private conversations, so everything has to be taken with a grain of salt until more concrete information comes out. But the fact that someone this close to Drake is willing to go this public, is willing to risk his own reputation and safety to speak out, suggests there's something real behind it. People don't usually burn bridges this dramatically unless they feel they have no other choice. And that alone should make us pay attention. All right, now let's talk about the Kendrick Lamar angle, because this is where the story goes from an internal OVO beef to a full-blown culture war. Remember, this whole situation is happening in the aftermath of Kendrick absolutely demolishing Drake on Not Like Us. Like, we're talking one of the most devastating diss tracks in modern hip-hop history. A song that had even Drake fans quietly nodding like, yeah, Ken, you got him. So the context here is important. Drake just took a massive public L. His reputation as untouchable in rap, you've got shattered. Kendrick exposed him on multiple levels, personally, artistically, culturally, and Drake's been in damage control mode ever since, trying to rebuild his image, trying to remind people he's still the guy. And that's when Top 5, one of Drake's most vocal defenders during the Kendrick battle, turns around and posts Not Like Us content. Do you understand how brutal that is? That's not just switching sides. That's twisting the knife. That's saying, actually, Kendrick was right and I was wrong to defend you. That, by the way, is a legendary level pettiness. Kendrick just stays silent, creates incredible music, and watches Drake's own people validate everything he said. That's a masterclass in letting your work speak for itself. Now, from a fan's perspective, this Kendrick angle adds a whole new layer to how we're supposed to view the beef, because rap battles are usually pretty contained. Two artists go at it, one wins in the court of public opinion, and then it fades. But this has real world consequences. This is affecting Drake's relationships, his business, his entire operation in Toronto. Kendrick didn't just win a rap battle, he exposed structural weaknesses that are now causing internal collapse. And the scary part for Drake is that this might just be the beginning. If Top 5 felt comfortable enough to flip publicly and align with Kendrick, how many other people in Drake's circle are privately validating brick spellers? How many parties even are watching this? I don't think they can get it any more valid. Maybe it's all that big they get it. The only way that is it's mostly like some kind of mystical, spiritual, religious institution, but we don't see any of that in this area, and there's nothing like that. There's no tandem things in the spirituality. So if we say there's nothing, is because there's nothing.
Section 7. DJ Akademiks' role and media manipulation. All right, we gotta talk about DJ Akademiks because his role in this whole situation is fascinating and honestly kind of disturbing when you break it down. Akademiks has positioned himself as this neutral media personality, right? Just reporting the news, just giving people a platform to speak. But during that call of Top 5, the mask slipped completely. From the jump, Akademiks was in damage control mode for Drake. Every time Top 5 brought up a legitimate grievance, Akademiks tried to minimize it, reframe it, or redirect the conversation. He'd say things like, but you gotta understand Drake's perspective, or maybe you're reading too much into it, or I think you're being a little emotional right now. Classic gaslighting tactics. And Top 5, to his credit, did not let Akademiks get away with it. He kept pushing back. He kept bringing the conversation back to the facts. He kept refusing to let Akademiks spin the narrative.
And you could hear the frustration in Akademiks' voice as he realized he couldn't control this the way he usually controls Drake-related conversations on his platform. Now, here's why this matters beyond just this one call. DJ Akademiks has become one of the most powerful gatekeepers in hip-hop media. He has a massive platform. Millions of people watch his streams, listen to his podcast, follow his social media, and he's used that platform to consistently prop up Drake's image while tearing down Drake's critics and competitors. Think about how many times Akademiks has downplayed legitimate criticism of Drake. Think about how many times he's made excuses for Drake's behavior. Think about how many times he's framed people who speak out against Drake as bitter, jealous, or clout chasing. That's not journalism. That's public relations. That's being a mouthpiece for a celebrity brand. And people online have been saying for years that Akademiks is on Drake's payroll in some form. Now, we don't have proof of that. No contracts have been leaked. No bank statements have been shown. But the circumstantial evidence is strong. The way Akademiks jumps to Drake's defense, the way he gets exclusive information about Drake's projects before anyone else, the way he's invited to OVO events, it all points to a relationship that goes way beyond just covering the news. So when Top 5 went on Akademiks' platform and refused to play along the pro-Drake narrative, it was basically a rejection of the entire media ecosystem that Drake has built around himself. It was Top 5 saying, I'm not going to let you spend this. I'm not going to let you make me look crazy. I'm telling the truth, and you can either deal with it or show everyone exactly whose side you're on. And Akademiks showed whose side he's on. He couldn't help himself. Even as Top 5 was laying out serious allegations and legitimate grievances, Akademiks kept trying to steer the conversation back to, but Drake's done so much for you, and maybe you should just talk to Drake privately, and I think you're being a little emotional right now. And this is why media literacy is so important, y'all, because when you're watching these platforms, you gotta ask yourself, who benefits from this narrative? Who's being protected? Who's being demonized? And once you start asking those questions, you realize that a lot of hip-hop media is just celebrity PR disguised as journalism. Now, after that call, Akademiks did what he always does. He spent the next several streams trying to walk back the damage. He brought on other guests to provide context. He framed Top 5 as emotional or unstable. He emphasized all the things Drake has done for people in Toronto. Classic crisis management playbook. But here's the thing. It didn't work this time. The internet wasn't buying it. People clipped the moments where Akademiks was clearly running defense. They made compilation videos showing his bias. They called him out for gaslighting Top 5 in real time. And the consensus was clear. Akademiks isn't a journalist. He's Drake's damage control specialist. And that realization is spreading. More and more people are starting to see through the game. They're starting to understand that platforms like Akademiks exist not to inform, but to shape perception, to control narratives, to protect certain artists while destroying others. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Now, this goes beyond just Drake, by the way. This is about how celebrity culture and media have merged into this weird symbiotic relationship where news is just whatever narrative benefits the people with power and money. And the scary part is how effective it is. How many people still take Akademiks at face value? How many people don't question why he always seems to have Drake's back? But Top 5 breaking through that narrative machine, that's significant. That's a crack in the armor. Because if one person can go on Akademiks' platform and refuse to play along with that narrative, others can too. And the more people who do that, the less power these gatekeepers have, the less control they can exert over how we perceive these artists. And maybe that's the real story here. Not just that Top 5 turned on Drake, but that he did it in a way that exposed the entire media infrastructure propping Drake up. He pulled back the curtain and showed everyone how the machine works. And now that we've seen it, we can't pretend we don't know. Section 8, Toronto Street Politics and the Loyalty Myth, 2515 to 2930. Now, let's talk about Toronto, because if you're not from the city, you might not fully understand how deep the politics run there, and why this Top 5 situation is even more complicated than it looks on the surface. Toronto street culture is layered. You got different hoods, different crews, different beefs that go back years. And Drake's tried to position himself above all that, like he's this unifying force. But the reality is way messier. Drake's from Toronto, but he's not from the streets of Toronto in the way that someone like Top 5 is. Drake grew up in a middle-class neighborhood, went to a performing arts school, was on a teen TV show. His come-up was very different from the people he's now affiliated with. And that's always created this weird dynamic where Drake wants street credibility, but doesn't actually have the lived experience to back it up. So what does Drake do? He attaches himself to people who do have that credibility. He brings them into his circle, puts them on his payroll, associates with them publicly so that their street cred rubs off on him. And for a while, it worked. People like Top 5 gave Drake legitimacy in spaces he wouldn't naturally have access to. But here's the problem with that strategy. Those relationships are transactional from the start. Drake's not really from that world, so his loyalty to it is always going to be conditional. The moment the street politics become inconvenient for his brand, he's going to distance himself. And that's what Top 5 is calling out. He's saying, you used me for credibility, but the moment you had to choose between me and someone who benefits you more, you picked them. And this isn't the first time people in Toronto have said this about Drake. There have been multiple instances over the years where Drake's aligned with someone, benefited from that association, and then quietly backed away when things got complicated. But nobody really spoke on it loudly because Drake's power in Toronto is immense. He can make or break careers there, so people stayed quiet. Until now. Until Top 5 said, nah, I'm not staying quiet anymore. And that's what makes this such a watershed moment for Toronto hip-hop. Because if someone this embedded in the scene is willing to publicly challenge Drake's loyalty narrative, it opens the door for others to do the same. Let's talk specifics. The Pressa situation is a perfect example of how Drake navigates Toronto politics in a way that benefits him, but leaves others feeling used. Pressa is from a completely different part of the city than Top 5. They have real beef, real history. And Drake knows this. He's aware of the dynamics. But he chose to publicly support Pressa anyway, knowing it would hurt Top 5. Now, Drake's defense would probably be, I'm just supporting good music, or I don't pick sides in street beef. But that's cap. Because by publicly promoting Pressa's album, especially one that allegedly disses Top 5's hood, Drake absolutely did pick a side. He just picked the side that was more beneficial for his brand at that moment. And that's what breeds resentment in Toronto. Because people see Drake as someone who picks and chooses when to be loyal based on what serves him, not based on genuine relationships. He'll rock with you when it makes him look connected to the streets, but the moment you become a liability or someone else offers him more value, he's moving on. Imagine being Top 5 in that scenario. You've defended this man online. You've risked your reputation for him. You've connected him to your world, introduced him to people, given him credibility, and then he turns around and publicly backs your op while your op is dissing your neighborhood? That's not just a business decision. That's a betrayal of the most fundamental street code there is. Loyalty. And here's what people outside Toronto don't always realize. Street loyalty isn't just some abstract concept. It's safety. It's survival. When you're from certain neighborhoods, the relationships you have and the respect you command are what keep you protected. So when Drake undermines that by publicly siding with your opposition, he's not just hurting your feelings, he's potentially putting you at risk. That's why Top 5's response was so extreme. That's why he leaked the track. That's why he went on Akademiks' platform and aired everything out. Because from his perspective, Drake crossed a line that you don't come back from. Drake prioritized his own interests over Top 5's safety. And that's unforgivable in street culture. Now, there's a bigger conversation to be had about whether Drake even should be held to street codes, given that he's not really from that world. Some people would argue he's an entertainer. He shouldn't have to navigate street politics. But here's the thing. Drake chose to align himself with that world. He chose to build his brand on street credibility, so he doesn't get to cherry pick when the rules apply to him. And the more you look at Drake's history in Toronto, the more you see this pattern repeat. He'll embrace certain artists or crews when it's beneficial, then quietly distance himself when the association becomes problematic. He did it with certain neighborhoods, certain artists, certain movements in the city, and every time people notice, but they don't say anything publicly because they're scared of being blackballed. But Top 5 just broke that silence. And now other people in Toronto are paying attention, watching to see what happens to him. If Drake retaliates, if he tries to blackball Top 5 or turn the city against him, it'll only prove Top 5's point about how Drake operates. But if he does nothing, if he just lets this blow over, it makes him look weak and validates everything Top 5 said. It's a lose-lose situation for Drake, honestly. And that's what happens when you build your brand on loyalty, but don't actually practice it. Eventually, someone's going to call you out and you won't have a good answer because the criticism is true. On the flip side, if Drake tries to address it publicly and spin it in his favor, he's going to have a hard time because Top 5 has receipts. He was there. He knows what happened, and he's already demonstrated that he's not afraid to go into detail. So any narrative Drake tries to push can be immediately countered with Top 5's version of events, and people are going to have to decide who they believe. But let's zoom out even further, because there's a bigger cultural shift happening here that goes beyond just Drake. We're in an era where fans are demanding more from artists in terms of authenticity and accountability. The old playbook of stay mysterious, control the narrative, never show weakness doesn't work the way it used to. People want to see the real person behind the brand. And when that real person turns out to be less admirable than the brand suggests, there are consequences. Drake's entire career has been built on carefully managed perception. He has been excellent at controlling his image, at shaping how people see him. But that strategy only works as long as everyone plays along. And the moment people inside the operation start contradicting that image publicly, the whole thing falls apart. Because now the image isn't just being challenged by haters or rivals, it's being challenged by people who were there, who saw behind the curtain. So here's what I think happens next. One of 3 scenarios. Scenario 1, Drake ignores it, hopes it blows over, and moves on. This is the safest play in the short term, but it leaves the allegations and the negative narrative out there festering. And if more people come forward later, he'll look even worse for not addressing it when he had the chance. Scenario 2, Drake responds publicly, tries to spin his version of events. This is risky because Top 5 can counter whatever he says, and it turns into a he said, she said situation where Drake's credibility is already damaged. But if Drake's team is confident they can outspin Top 5, they might try it. Scenario 3, Drake tries to retaliate behind the scenes. This is the most dangerous play because if it gets exposed, if people find out Drake's trying to blackball Top 5 or hurt him in some way, it confirms everything Top 5 said about Drake's character, and it opens Drake up to even more criticism and potential legal issues depending on how far the retaliation goes. My guess? Drake stays quiet publicly, but absolutely works behind the scenes to minimize the damage and possibly retaliate in subtle ways. That's been his playbook in the past, and he's probably betting it'll work again. But the problem is, the internet doesn't forget. The internet doesn't let things go. And the narrative around Drake has already shifted in a way that's going to be really hard to reverse. Because at the end of the day, what Top 5 did was give people permission to question Drake's loyalty narrative. And once that permission is granted, once people feel like they're allowed to criticize Drake without being immediately attacked by his fan base or his media allies, the floodgates can open. And that's the real danger for Drake here. Not just this one situation, but what it represents and what it might trigger. So let's bring this all together, because when you step back and look at the full picture of what's happening here, it's honestly staggering. You have one of the biggest artists in the world, someone who has dominated hip-hop for over a decade, watching his carefully constructed image crumble because people who were inside his circle are now publicly contradicting that image. And the wildest part, this all started because Drake couldn't just stay neutral in a Toronto street beef. Like, that's the decision that set all this off. If Drake had just not promoted Pressa's album, if he'd stayed out of it like he claims he always does, Top 5 never goes public with any of this. But Drake made a choice that benefited him in the moment, but had these massive long-term consequences. And there's a lesson in that, right? About how the decisions you make when you think nobody's watching or when you think you can get away with it, those decisions always come back eventually. Drake thought he could play both sides, thought he could be selectively loyal without anyone calling him out on it. But Top 5 just proved that wrong. Showed that eventually somebody's gonna hold you accountable. And for everyone watching this unfold, I think there's something relatable about it too. Like, how many times have you been in a situation where you were loyal to someone who wasn't loyal back? Where you defended someone, had their back, and then they turned around and showed you that your loyalty meant nothing to them? That feeling of betrayal, that sense of, wow, I really misjudged this person, that's universal. That's what makes the story hit, even if you're not a Drake fan or you don't know anything about Toronto street politics.